This season, Sista Brunch has a new segment called Let's Talk Tech. And we want to know about a word, a concept, or even a piece of equipment you might use in your job that people who don't have your job might not know.
This is Khalilah Joi. And you get yourself a nice backdrop. Of course, you can use a wall, but I'll be honest, it makes a difference to have a nice backdrop. You want to get good lighting because sometimes you have to film at night. So you don't have daylight, so you're going to need some kind of lighting. I have 2 box lights set up now in this room in front of me that I use for my auditions. Most of this stuff you can find online, and it's not super expensive, but get a decent quality. Of course, you're going to need a tripod for your camera. I still use my phone. I do have a professional like Nikon camera, but the phone is just so much easier because it's seamless with my computer because I have an iPhone and I have an Apple computer. So I just upload everything directly into iMovie and edit. And it's very simple. And then another app that I find very useful, especially if you're on a time crunch and need to learn a lot of dialogue, is something called Line Learner. You can record your lines and your other speakers' lines, and you can eventually take your own voice out so you can simply respond to your cue lines. It's a great learning app. Well, you usually just have your slate, your scenes, and you do a couple of fade in and out transitions so it looks a little more professional, and then just send it off and you're good to go.
Hi, I'm Shirlyn A. Cesar. The first thing that's coming to mind is a paper edit. Paper edit is really building the story on paper to hand over to the editor to get the story together. When I did High on the Hog for Netflix, it really was like taking a virtual post-it and saying, I want the character saying this here, and then it goes into this segment and goes into this segment. And the editor can lengthen those post-its and put in between. And I think, just depending on who you are and your process, that could work really, really well for you.
Ms. Noelle Green.
We are using LED screens more and more instead of green screens. It's almost becoming a part of our foundation and replacing the old school way of doing things. If you have a set on stage and it's a house and you want, when you look out the window to see the grass in the yard, back in the day, we would drop a green screen or a blue screen, and in post-production, visual effects would add the elements. But now you don't need to do that so much because an LED screen will actually project an image, and it can be even a moving image. For driving shots, instead of being in a car and surrounded by a green screen, you can be surrounded by the desert or outer space or whatever immersive environment you're ultimately going to create. It's happening live in real time with the director. It's easier for the actors to feel more immersed in it. Mandalorian, the Star Wars show, was the first one to do it where it got a ton of attention. It's still in process and not every show is doing it, but I see it ultimately taking over, which is exciting. It's almost like when we went from film to digital. LED is a lot more money up front and green screen is cheaper up front. But if you shoot right, you save more money on the back end because of the complex equipment and technicians is ultimately more expensive, but you get a better quality look. And for directors and LED screens, it means you have to have a vision up front of what's going to be on that screen because you're committing to it. And that's the first thing your VFX supervisor is going to start talking you through, is committing to the look and selecting it. Your VFX supervisor is the creative and the visionary that works very closely with the director. Your VFX producer is budgeting and scheduling the work that needs to get done. So they're more aligned with the line producer, and the supervisor's more aligned with the director.
Hi, this is Canella Williams Larrabee. Production designer designs the film or TV show. If you ever looked at a film or television show and you notice like the different colors and the paints, and just the person that designs the look of the show or the movie. So they run the art department, which consists of like an art director. It's a pretty big department because you have assistant art directors, you have drafts people, you have graphics, which is like what all the stuff you're putting on the screen. If you have a television running in the background, that comes from the art department, graphics department. Then you also have the video department that puts it up on the screen. And that's also a different union. There's everything that an actor touches and eats too. So when they're eating on screen and drinks, that is also the property department, or we say props. And the person who runs that is the prop master, or sometimes now people say prop mistress. So the things that actors don't touch, like clocks and stuff, if the actor is not touching it. But then sometimes you also have jewelry that can be props, or it can be costumes. The costume department is the people who get the actors dressed. It's interchanging sometimes. So it's like costumes are the ones that design, and then wardrobes are the one that get everybody dressed. So there's like two departments that deal with the clothing.
And it's Morenike Joela Evans, a really great director. By the time you get on set, it looks very easy. You know what I mean? But it's not. Prep is really important. I use Scriptation and Keynote, and I draw out the blocking and where everyone is, and I have alternative options if this doesn't work or that doesn't work. Scriptation, especially great for multicams, because you get a script change after that first rehearsal, and it might not come until sometimes 1 a.m, but you've got to rehearse the next day starting at 8 or 9. It translates the old script into the new, but keeps all your notes. You can just adjust one thing instead of having to start over. And I'll just say for multicam, it's 4 cameras, A, B, C, and X. And then here's the thing that clicked it all in for me. And it was Eric Dean Seaton who told me when I was on Family Reunion. He was like, A and X are your close-ups, B and C are your wides. And you can move them around, but it helps you figure out your coverage and how you want things to work. So that's just a quick that no one else told me.
This is Erika Green Swafford.
Yes, because it starts out like when you were just talking about, you were a writer, staff writer. And then the next logical step is story editor.
Right.
And then after that, is it?
It's executive story editor,
Right. Executive story editor. Then co-producer.
then producer, supervising producer, and then co-executive
Got it.
producer.
Good Lord. But when it's your show, when you're developing, you are called
Executive producer,
and
showrunner.
showrunner.
This is Black Girls Film Camp alum and Fansion's niece, Jaida Cox. I was really intrigued by post-production and learning about coloring and color theory. In Full Circle, there's a lot of nuggets in costuming with color and the way that it was edited. And one big thing that continued to show up in a symbol was shoes. So my main character, A. Marie, was being bullied by another girl who wore a lot of Jordan, and A. Marie wore Converses. And so the bully wore orange Jordans, which kind of stood out more and were a dominating color. They were a dominating color over A. Marie's white Converses, which represented her innocence. As she continued to get bullied, she bought herself a pair of Jordans, but hers, even though they looked similar to the bullies, were purple. And for me, that represented that she still did have that deep emotion in her, and she still had depth, even though she was being shallow by trying to be somebody else. I made sure to communicate with my editor, and she worked on coloring afterwards to emphasize that.
I'm Daysha Broadway, ACE, and literally went on the Buna Murray website and applied to be an assistant editor. And they called me because it said on my resume that I knew Avid. They were switching from Final Cut to Avid at the time. I had an Avid certification from Chapman. They hired me on Keeping Up with the Kardashians. I don't know what season it was. I edited 24 episodes of that show, and it's bizarre. Starting off in reality TV, I think, is really good for anybody who is cutting, and a lot of people do that so that they can get their hours, so that they can get into the union, so that they don't have to do reality anymore. But I don't think of it as a bad thing. I learned so much cutting reality TV because you're doing things from scratch. You have to learn about story in a way you don't get from textbooks. You go in and craft it with what you have. And sometimes you don't have much. I remember being an assistant editor on The Challenge and having to group 27 cameras. Some of them are GoPros, shot at different frame rates. It was a madhouse. It's very much like The Real World, which I also worked on one season for. Yeah, that was nuts because I grew up watching that show, and then I was on the port one season. Yeah, so they'll have the cameramen walking around the house filming everyone. And then they have GoPros set up everywhere. It was the job of the assistant editor to take all of those cameras and group them together and sync the audio so that every angle is being picked up at the time that it's supposed to. But back when I was working on Kardashians, we would sometimes have this iPhone footage that was shot on a private jet. shooting vertical back then was a real problem. It's like, can you guys not just turn the phone sideways, please? Matching the frame rate 2398 is the film standard, and you can tell the difference between that and 60 or 2997. Even visually, you can tell the difference. If a DP is creating a LUT or something like that, you can tell the difference once you start bringing footage into whether it's Avid, Premiere, or DaVinci. Back then, Avid used to just spit it out and be like, this is not the same frame rate as the rest of the footage in this project. Premiere will say this timeline is 2398. This footage is 2997. Do you want to create a new sequence? I was like, no, I want to put them together.
My name is Loretta Edwards Wilson. So I always tell producers in their pitches, do research on who you're pitching to and help out the programming team with, hey, this can be paired with such and such a show that you already have.
Oh,
It
put that
helps
in your
them.
pitch. It's beyond
yes.
saying this is like this. You're literally saying, here's when you can program this.
Because
Yes,
on the other
okay.
side, it does a lot of things. It helps the programmer visualize where it can go. It's less work. And then
Right.
increases your value
Love
of the
it.
product. I always say if there's a film that you like or you feel like is a comp, look it up on IMDb. Try to see if you can find how much their budget was. And that could really dictate how much the streamer or, network would give for it. Your programmer is really the heartbeat of a platform, right? Everything has to come through the programming team. The programming team is speaking with the financial team, managing the budget. It's speaking to every single piece of a network or platform, talking to everyone. They really are the funnels. Get to know your programmers.
We haven't had a programmer on this podcast either. That should be your acquisitions first. That's your first bestie. And then the programmer after the
programmers. Yes.
This is Marley Jones, a proud alumni member and team director with the Black Girls Film Camp 2024 cohort. Okay, so I have the Sony A7 and I love it so much. Black Girls Film Camp actually hooked me up with this for free of charge. Yes. So I've been using that ever since I got that last year. So this is the FE and it's 2870 millimeter. And I really like this camera because oftentimes some cameras are better just for videography and then just for photography. But this is like equally as good for videography and photography. This has great audio. There's always something going on Howard's campus. So if I don't have time to hook up the mic that they gave us, then that just works perfectly. Like it's a perfect camera. Yeah.
Season 6 of Sista Brunch is produced by Tasha Rogers. Expansion is recording the podcast from the unceded territory of the Tongva and the Chumash peoples in Los Angeles, California. And I'm recording this episode from Stanford University, which sits on the ancestral lands of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe.